Okay, ma'am, you had your hand up back there. And ma'am, I'm coming to you next right here. I'm sorry.
Cornel Abab, Voice of America. Thank you guys for doing this. With all due respect, I'm hearing all of you say that it's not a crisis mode. I'm hearing that we're winning after 16 years of war. I'm hearing that we're not in a crisis, but we have a shortage of 3,000 maintainers. We have sailors that can take the fight, but we've had 4 different investigations that have shown that the sailors were not trained in the basics. They didn't have the basics down. So I'm just kind of wondering, what is your definition of a crisis, and what is your definition of winning? Because from the outside looking in, with all due respect, we're seeing a lot of problems all at once.
Let me hit it first. So I'll tackle the winning piece. So I was just in Raqqa, Syria, about 4 weeks ago. And what I saw over there was our U.S. forces advising partner forces, and we had ISIS on the run. As a matter of fact, I was on the ground for 4 hours, and I could not believe the level of lethality we were putting on ISIS, and they were still holding out. And if you look at where ISIS was in 2014, where they basically had almost all of Iraq under control, and then they started moving into Syria, they were a huge problem in 2014. But with the strategy we have now, where we are building partner capacity, we're training, advising, assisting, and in some cases accompanying our partner forces, we have ISIS on the run in the Middle East. Now, obviously, this is a generational threat that is born out of an ideology, and they're also trying to do things in Africa and Europe and other places. But when you look at the effect we've had on ISIS and how that gets to defending the homeland, that's huge, very huge. And I'll ask any others comments.
I would just say,
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
I was going to say, I think it's all about perspective, right? So you may see the challenges that we have, that we all have as a service, that any organization might have. What you might not see are the thousands and thousands of great things that our service members do on a regular basis, both in combat and from a training perspective, from a humanitarian support. So that's really how at least I can speak for the Air Force, how we see it. The perspective that we take is, while we do have challenges, we've always had challenges, we will likely always have challenges in the future. You balance that against the great things that we do for this nation, and it becomes easy for me to not look at the challenges that we have as a crisis.
When you talk to an airman who's done 13 deployments, that's a tough situation for that guy. When you talk to a Marine who's having to scrounge in a air yard, graveyard, what they call, for parts, that's a crisis for that individual and for that team. So, I mean, is that not very concerning to you guys? And when you talk to an average Afghan who says 16 years of war, when the Taliban is still making some gains in some areas, they wouldn't call that winning. So I'm just wondering, is that not a factor in all of this positivity? Aside from the budget, everything else seems to be going positive based on this briefing. So can you help me understand?
It's a concern, ma'am. It absolutely is. If you're talking about crisis from a numbers, a parts, a budget, I don't think there's ever been. I've been in 34 years. Every day there's a crisis in something. There's a crisis in something. But you walk out and you ask the average Marine, are we in a crisis? I don't think to tell you we're in a crisis. We are concerned about parts. We're addressing that. We are concerned about the budget. We're addressing that. That's a crisis. This is not, war is not, Google doesn't do it, not something, you'll always be in crisis. A year. From that perspective. Average age 25. There's just not a day something 17 suicides. Sexual assault. Crisis, harassment. It's like Groundhog Day. Safety. But the fact that we're sitting there having freedom of speech, and we're having this conversation, and the people who are fighting against are not, that alone tells me we're winning. We're winning. And I absolutely understand where you're going, because we have to look Gold Star families in the eye when we lose someone. And that's serious. Every one of them are serious. Not only do we have to look them in the eye when we lose the individual, but they return to the Marine Corps and to the services to still sit beside us. That's a constant reminder that we always have to do better by our people. Always doing better by our people. That's why we're so focused in on those things that may not be a crisis outside of the building, but it's definitely a concern of ours. I don't want you to think that we're not concerned about those things.
We're not here to paint a rosy picture and try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but as leaders of our respective services, we see every challenge as an opportunity for us to invest more, to engage more, to create programs and processes that help that airman who's deployed 13 times and that corporal who can't get the parts and whatnot. So some of the things that you may see as a crisis, we see them as opportunities and subsequent challenges for us to tackle.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say the same thing. Echo some of my peers' evaluations there. Is the first time I've ever heard that word is when you said it and I saw it on the news. I haven't had a single soldier tell me in 3 or 4 years that we're in crisis. We have challenges. It's a complex world. We have tragedies. These young men and women need to know that the people in America believe the same thing they do, and that they are out there doing great work for our nation every day. Our allies are assured. Our potential adversaries are deterred, and we will defeat if we have to.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Sergeant Major, can I ask, there's a proposal out of Congress, 2.4% raise, White House 2.1%. Who knows where that comes out in the end? Then you got BAH, commissaries, you don't know what's going to happen. And it all might get wrapped up in another continuing resolution, and here we go again. The troops come to you and they say, hey, Top, am I going to get a raise or what? What are these guys doing? What do you tell them? How does that affect morale?
Well, we tell them exactly what's going on here. We're here in the Beltway and in the Pentagon, and we serve in these high-level meetings with our bosses here, but also on Capitol Hill, so that we can tell the troops exactly what's going on. I can tell you in my travels, as I go around the world, the troops, there are concerns about stuff like dual BAH and things like that, but more importantly to the troops, they want to have great quality of service along with that quality of life. Meaning, I want the latest optics I can have on my rifles. I want the latest kind of equipment or technology to get after this emerging unmanned aerial system threat. Very few complaints do I get on pay raises or quality of life kind of issues. It's how can I get better at doing my mission that you're expecting me to accomplish out there. I'll open it up. Go
There are
ahead.
3 types of readiness, sir. Unit, which are services, personal, and family. Now, from a family perspective, I've been in this job almost 3 years. I've never heard a Marine ask about a pay raise. What you will hear Marines and families address is, child development centers, youth sports, exceptional family member programs, those programs that support the family, the Class B programs. It's not that it's a pay raise thing. It's when you say BAH, dual BAH, compensation, absolutely. And those things we're absolutely involved in as senior enlisted. Those are the conversations that we have about the budget and how it affects, talk about continuing resolutions, getting the budget in the middle of the year, this last fiscal year, having to try to crunch the money. We also go to the Hill as well to talk to Congress about these situations. And those are the things that we address, the quality of life issues that families address with us, as well as our service members, to make sure there's balance, Because I don't care how much lethality we talk about, if we can't keep high quality warriors to fight for this nation, we're not gonna win, because they're not gonna stay. We enlist the warrior, and for those who have families, we try to retain the family, because they have a voice in whether they're gonna stay or not. So that conversation, it's absolutely heard and being spoken to.
Ma'am, go ahead.
This is for Sergeant Major Daly. So the Army is looking to get bigger next year. What kind of mix of retention and accessions are you looking at, and what kind of incentives are you mulling on both sides?
And thanks, Megan, for the question. So yeah, we are, and we're happy about getting bigger. And we're glad that our elected leaders are helping us do that. So we think the majority of that's going to come, roughly about 80K from as our planning factor for sessions right now. And we did so well last year in our in-service retention program that our in-service retention actually is not that big a significant number because we've already accomplished it for FY18, preponderance of that in FY17. So from an incentive, incentives are based upon the need and requirement by skill level and MOS. So what we won't see is a whole lot, a bigger increase in bonuses unless we specifically need that skill level and MOS. And we'll tune our sessions incentives based upon how we do throughout the year.
Do you see?
Sir, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you see doing 2-year enlistments again, or kind of quality of life bonuses like that rather than just money?
I see that. I think we'll have to base it upon the needs. So far, right now, we're a little bit below glide in the sessions, which is not concerning. We're coming just first part of the year. Like I said, retention is doing great. Last year was the best year we had in a decade, and I think we're just going to have to take it quarter by quarter and see where we fall.
Sir, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a personnel policy issue, the transgender guidance. There have been 2 court-ordered injunctions now, but yet the SecDef, I believe, has a January deadline for sessions. So I'm just wondering what you guys are planning at this point. And the second part of the question is, I'm wondering if you're seeing any type of a morale issue, not just among transgender troops, but other troops who see the possibility of their fellow service members being separated based on their gender identity.
So I'll take the first part of the question, then I'll open it up to my colleagues for the second part. So right now, all of us right here serve on a Secretary of Defense directed transgender policy that is chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It includes our undersecretaries and others, but we're part of this panel that is looking to provide guidance to the Secretary on what a transgender service panel or service policy should look like. Right now, we've been at this a couple of months. We have till the end of December to come up with a recommendation that we'll provide to the Secretary then so that he can go forward with implementing the policy. And I'll leave that there. In terms of the morale, I'll let you all open it up to you all.
I have not seen or don't anticipate any morale issues right now, so I think it really depends on how all this plays out. We all have varying numbers of members who might fall into the category of a transgender or someone with gender dysphoria or whatnot, but to this point, from an Air Force perspective, no morale issues.
I'll say from the Coast Guard being the smallest service, absolutely no issues at all. Matter of fact, some of you might have heard our service chief a couple months ago that made a public declaration that he would stand behind all those members in our service that had started their transition under the old guidelines. So I think our workforce appreciates that support. And again, I have not heard and don't expect that we'll have any morale issues in our United States Coast Guard.
Yeah, I'll tell you, most sailors just, occasionally it will come up, and it's just kind of, where are we with the policy? That's it. They just kind of want to know, what are we doing?
So, sir, I'm going to go to you because you got the best looking haircut in the room. And you're giving me some recommendations here in about 3 years when I retire because, I've had this haircut for 35 years.
I've only had this one for 10, so it stays well.
Okay, good. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Scott Mossioni with Federal News Radio. I wanted to ask, the retention and recruitment numbers at this point sound like they're pretty good, but over the next 10 years, there's some signs that are coming. The Blue Star Families survey just came out, 60% of service members say they wouldn't recommend to their children serving. I mean, you can look at your arms. There's a lot of deployments that you're doing. How are you going to change your service in the next 10 years to accommodate future recruitment and retainment issues?
So I'll speak from a joint perspective. First of all, we have to be prepared to fight and win our nation's battles. And with that comes a certain set of standards that we have to have, because we can't predict what our enemy is going to be able to do to us. So in order to maintain warfighting competitive advantages, we have to make sure that we have the most quality people we have to do the job. Now, as you mentioned, and as I described earlier, when 25% of 18 to 25-year-olds don't qualify for military service, either due to not meeting the physical requirements or other issues, And then if you look at where that might be in the year of 2030, that's potentially a huge risk to our country right there. So as we move forward, we have to continue to have recruiting and accessing practices and policies that attract the best talent that we have. But we also have to get beyond what you already talked about. You know, if 1% of our force serves right now, most of their influences in their family hasn't come from their parents. It's come from their grandparents who were in the Vietnam era and things like that. So we have to make sure that we continue to provide practices and policies that attract this talent as it comes in.
That includes the new blended retirement, credentialing, and other transition benefits that will become a recruiting tool, I believe, in the future. And we probably won't know until this blended retirement system is online for a number of years, whether that's a detriment to keeping folks around, or if they are able to put money in a bank and get tuition assistance and get a college degree and get credentials that will work on the outside, whether that'll keep them in the service. I'm of the belief that folks believe that we invest in them, that they will stay for longer, because the folks at the 10, 12-year mark are the folks that we are heavily invested in, and we want to keep them as career servicemen through their time. But I think the jury's still out on some of that.
Not all young folks who are eligible to serve are necessarily propense. You know, I wasn't that person. I didn't come from a military background and would not have likely joined the military had it not been for certain circumstances. However, I think the greatest tool that we have is offering young men and women in America today the opportunity to do something that they love. And sometimes that's an actual occupation like cyber or being a space operator, and sometimes that's the opportunity to just serve their country and do something bigger and better than themselves. So, I mean, we always look at ways that we can improve our recruitment and retention. We always look at ways that we can make sure that we are, maintaining ties with the evolving, ties of the day. Things like recently we started allowing more tattoos than we had in the past. I mean, that was just something that's just evolution in recruiting. So,
Okay, we'll go. Go ahead, sir, then we'll go to you next, ma'am.
Steve Losey, Air Force Times. My question is for Chief Wright. I want to ask you about deployments. You and the other Air Force leaders have expressed concern about the pace of deployments. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing the pressure and the pace increase? Are we looking at more airmen going on, say, a 1-to-1 deployment ratio?
no, not specifically. So it really just kind of depends on the career field. So most of our 1-to-1 deployments come from our battlefield airmen, our special forces airmen, but deployments are increasing only because, at least from an Air Force perspective, we're in more places, right? So a lot more deployments to Africa, a lot more deployments on the European EUCOM AOR. So not a huge increase in deployments. Some of them are spread out. We're actually taking a look at some of our 365-day deployments to see if those, if we have the right number of folks deploying for a full year.
So for those airmen, like the battlefield airmen, aside from trying to add more airmen, which I know you're trying to do, aside from the 365, what else are you doing to try to ease the pressure, ease the burden on those airmen who have been deploying the most?
Right. So one of the things that we try to look at is teaming up. We're actually looking at our construct and how we deploy and how we support our combatant commanders. And so we'll continue to take a kind of a comprehensive look at deployments as a whole to make sure that, one, we're meeting the requirements, and two, that we're maintaining the right level of readiness and morale for those folks who frequently deploy.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I just want to go back briefly to the question of whether or not there's a crisis of readiness, because as several other people have mentioned, there's definitely a sense on Capitol Hill that there is, and that's part of the reason that, a large part of the reason that the Armed Services Committee's passed such a large defense authorization bill, one that blows past the budget caps. So I guess two questions on that. If there isn't a crisis, why is there such a, can you give us a justification for why then, why we need to have such a large budget this year? And do you feel like your message, this from the senior enlisted perspective, is getting to those leaders on Capitol Hill? Your sense that it's a concern but not a crisis?
Okay, I'll take that on first, and then I'll pass it on. So, you know, when we talk about crisis, I think about when's the last time we had an externally planned, an externally prepared, an externally executed attack on the United States? Well, it was 9/11. Okay, we've gotten much better at defending our homeland, whether it's through how we share information or what we're doing. It's having an impact on those violent extremists that pose a threat to us. The other thing is when you talk to a man or woman that serves in the United States military, there's things that they have to deal with every day. They may not have the right amount of people. They buy their table of organization and equipment that they should have. They may not have the right amount of equipment to do what they need to do. And they may not have the right conditions set. But every day, whether it's a young staff sergeant airman, a joint terminal attack controller in Syria that I saw in May, that in my opinion, he was the only guy out there with a couple of Green Berets. He was the air combat commander, if you ask me, because he kept putting lethal, my term, scunion on ISIS that was having a huge effect because of his ability to do the mission and because of his relationship with those remotely piloted aircraft. So we don't look at that as a crisis, and our men and women don't look at that as a crisis. They look at every day I have to manage risk, and I have some things that I'm presented with every day that I have to deal with, and they get after it.
I mean, the world is unstable, right? So there's an increasing demand for air power. There's an increasing demand for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So as the world becomes more unstable around us, then the need for increased readiness, increased weapon systems, will continue to increase. So again, we don't necessarily see that as a crisis inside the military, but we're responding to the threats and the challenges of the world around us.
Sorry, Major.
You know, you look at the globe, 16 years ago, we've been fighting non-nation states for the last 16 years. When you look out there, if you look back to 9, 10, and you look at the view of the world and who we were focused on, 16 years later, totally different. Totally different. There's some nation states out there that have absolutely captured our attention. And on top of that, technology today doesn't cost what it did then. When we started this 16-year war, it cost about $3,500 to outfit the basic infantry marine. Today it costs almost $16,000. $16,000 16 years later. So when you talk about budget, you try to go from where you started in the 16-year war to the war we're going to fight today or tomorrow. Significantly different, costly. We've updated just about every aircraft platform in the Marine Corps. Sunset, the CH-46, V-22, has taken us further, more lethal, capability than ever before in the Marine Corps. And every aircraft rotary wing has got to chase that monster, got to keep up with it, to protect it, to provide it, support. So when you look at it from that perspective, and then you look at the people you bring in, that's got to have the quality, when you talk about technology, to work that equipment. All of that equipment takes a person or people, a group of people. And where we, look at, armed forces classification testing, whatever it is, you got to put people behind that cyber, that intel, that electronic warfare in numbers that we've never had to supply before. It's just you look at aviation and you look at infantry from a Marine perspective, aviation, when we started 9/11, is significantly higher in manpower than it was 9/11. Take a look at infantry. Not that infantry's gone down, aviation has come up and other areas of warfare, military occupation specialties for the Marine Corps. So we look 10 years out every year. That's what we're trying to get at. And trying to match budget, trying to match people, to make all that work. No one else outside of this building has to do a complex job like that. So I would say don't compare us with any other Google or anybody out there, because over 2 million in the uniform, over 2 million every day in the uniform. In this building alone, 22,000+ just under DOD umbrella. attached to the building, whether they're in the building physically or someplace else. Nobody has that complexity to do. And the fact that we're sitting here enjoying freedom, freedom is not free. It's not free. And we fully understand that. So this is why we wanted to address you today, to let you know we care more as much as our bosses and anyone about personnel and readiness. Make no mistake about it, the quality of life, that is our talk.